My name is Jim Walsh. I'm a member of the Millbrook First Nations. I have a degree in engineering and a diploma in surveying. I spent over 20 years in offshore construction and installation projects, largely in the oil and gas industry. So I've seen the effects of oil and gas exploration excuse me, and exploitation around the world. And in my experience, speaking to the report on the local economic benefits, my experience globally has been the local economic benefits are quite minimal, contrary to the optimistic report, the chapter that was already released. Typically, these drilling operations, they are well-oiled machines. They are teams that travel the world as a team. They don't hire any local help. Local people will be used to perhaps clear the roads, build the pads, catering, cleaning, and so on. One of the things that I thought was a glaring omission from that was nobody asked the people in New Brunswick what sort of long-term economic benefits came from the gas production there. Obviously, they're doing it. I know that there are some full-time jobs, but that was simply missing from the report. Another thing I wanted to address is there's a lack of baseline data for the geology and the water tables in Nova Scotia. We can't be expected to monitor the effects of fracking without knowing what we started with. And this is something I don't know that it's been done anywhere. The EPA and a number of organizations claim that there's been no documented cases of well contamination anywhere in North America from hydraulic fracturing operations, but a simple Google search will show that to be not true. There's a number of documented cases. There's a town called Dimmock in Pennsylvania, another town called Dish in Texas. I would encourage whoever authored these chapters to Google these two places and see. There's many stories of well contamination, and well contamination doesn't necessarily mean that the fracking chemicals have entered the water table. The well can also be contaminated with methane. While the water itself may be safe to drink, it's also flammable. And this also speaks to what Diane was just talking about as far as health not being simply the absence of disease or illness. It also has to do with the state of your mind. If you know that you've got methane in your wells, and whether or not it actually poisons you, what is that doing to you? What kind of stress is this going to cause you in the long term? A study that was done by the engineering department at Cornell University, I didn't make note of the professor's name, but he was actually he came from the oil and gas industry. He worked for NASA, he worked for the oil and gas industry, and he was one of the pioneers of the hydraulic fracturing techniques, and now he's one of the largest opponents of it. But in that study, it shows that the hydraulic fracturing operations release up to 20% more methane gas than conventional. It can be 20% larger carbon footprint, 20 to 100% larger carbon footprint than burning coal. These weren't addressed in the chapters that were released either. And that study was also backed up by a very recently released report from the Canadian Councils of Academies, saying pretty much the same thing. Very little research has been done into the overall effect of fracking process and the amount of diesel that's burned on site to perform the fracking, to build the sites, the amount of methane that's released during the fracturing process, and that leads to the topic of well integrity. No engineer in the world is going to give you a 100% guarantee on anything. I can guarantee that. But so you can expect some failures. Common sense dictates that over time, cement is going to degrade. And again, there was no mention of well monitoring after it's been abandoned. Will there be well monitoring? And if so, how long is this going to go on for? In 100 years' time, is this company still going to be responsible for monitoring the effects of the well that's been exhausted? 200 years' time. The same emissions are going to be coming out of it in 200 years' time as comes out of it today. But there's no mention of this. It's a very, very young industry. There is no long-term data on the effects of this. I'm not aware of any proven safe method of disposing of fracking wastewater. The fracking wastewater contains all kinds of contaminants, not just the chemicals that they use to make their slick water, but the natural occurring radioactive materials that come out, the salts that come out. There's no approved safe method for disposing of these waters. Now, one of the things that is used in the U.S., and I believe was discussed about using in Nova Scotia, is just to re-inject it into deep wells. But I read in the report that they said that the geology in Nova Scotia is not conducive to deep water re-injection. And that kind of begs the question, if it's not safe to put it back in the ground, what makes it safe to put it in the ground in the first place? What is it about the geology that makes it not conducive to a deep water re-injection? Would that be the same geological issues that make it not safe to do fracking in the first place? These are questions that I have from the reports that, quite frankly, weren't answered. I'm not sure if the law has been changed on these fracking companies or oil and gas companies having to disclose the chemicals. I know that for Triangle's operations in Paqtnkek, they did disclose what chemicals were in their solutions, but they didn't disclose the ratios. They didn't disclose their recipes. And I do understand the importance to these organizations of keeping their proprietary secrets secret. But their operations affect a lot more than just their shareholders. They affect us all. And we all have the right to know, what is it that they're putting in the ground? What is it that they're using to extract this oil and gas? Another thing that wasn't mentioned is tracing fluids. This claim that there's been no well contamination due to the fracking process, with a benign tracing fluid, it would be, and baseline data, it would be a fairly easy exercise to say, well, yes, it's here, or no, it isn't here. But there's no mention of tracing fluids anywhere in any of the reports. Let's see, Dr. Lisa McKenzie. She's a researcher. She has a PhD. She's a researcher for the Colorado School of Public Health. And she's authored a paper, and that paper has since been supported by Scientific American, about some of the toxic emissions, air emissions, close to well sites in the U.S., particularly in Colorado. And what they found is that there's a sharply increased risk of acute and chronic illnesses, from headaches to cancer to respiratory illness. Some of the things that they found in the air are xylene and carbon disulfide, which are neurotoxins. There's naphthalene, which is a blood poison. There's benzene, which is a carcinogen. But again, there wasn't much mention in the chapter so far about this. In Colorado, for example, the law states that any well has to be 350 feet from any residence or structure. And her research to this point has showed that if you even step back 7 times that amount, if you go half a mile away, these chemicals are still in the air. And no research has been done as, well, what is good? What is a safe distance? And where do these chemicals go? They're released into the atmosphere. They're very strong, of course, closer to the well that you get. But where do they go? The amount of fresh water that's required is astounding. And what you're doing is that you're taking this fresh water, you're contaminating it forever. You are forever removing it from our water supplies. And quite frankly, that doesn't make sense to me. And perhaps the next great battle after oil and gas is going to be for water. because we can live without oil and gas, but we cannot live without water. A couple of closing thoughts, if you will. If we spent as much time and energy that we spend on issues such as fracking and oil and gas exploration, we put that amount of time and energy into promoting and researching cleaner technologies, I think we would all be better off. And the last thing I'd like to say is, in addition to the final report that you're going to produce, there hasn't been any discussion about just asking the people. Ask the people of Nova Scotia, do you want fracking or not? And if the recent polls nationally show that 2/3 of Canadians are against fracking, if it turns out that 2/3 of people in Nova Scotia are against fracking operations, we live in a democracy. Should we not be enforcing the will of the people? Thank you.